You got a call sign, sweetheart? Let's hear it. Or did they just send me another lost lieutenant who can't find the right jet? Technical Sergeant Wade Kessler said it loud enough for the whole ramp to hear. He wanted it heard. The flight line at 13:45 hours was a sheet of white concrete, throwing heat back at the sky, and he stood in the middle of it, the way a man stands in his own front yard. Arms crossed, headset around his neck, a grease rag hanging from his hip pocket like a badge. The woman in front of him did not answer with words. She answered the way a pilot answers a strange aircraft, with her eyes. She was in a plain two-piece flight suit, no name patch, no squadron tab, no rank where rank should sit. Sage green fabric faded soft at the knees and elbows from somebody's long use. To Kessler, she was nothing. A wanderer. A new face who had walked onto his line without his blessing, and that, on his line, was the only sin that counted. She looked past him at the jet. It sat on the spot behind him under a sun that turned its skin to dull silver. An F-22, parked, chalked, intakes yawning. And the woman's gaze moved across it the way a hand moves across a row of switches in the dark. Intakes first, then the leading edges, then the control surfaces, each one in order. Then up the spine to the canopy and along the rail beneath it. She read the aircraft top to bottom in the exact sequence a pilot walks a pre-flight, and she did it without taking one step. Kessler did not know what he was looking at. He thought she was lost. Hey. He moved into her line of sight, tapped the red placard staked at the edge of the spot, restricted area. You see that? That means you don't touch my jet. You don't breathe on my jet. You don't stand near my jet until I say so. This is my flight line. Two younger airmen had drifted closer to watch. One of them, a senior airman with a sunburned neck and a name tape that read, Marsh, shifted his weight and looked at the concrete. He did not like this. He had the decency to be uncomfortable, and the lack of rank to do anything about it. Understood, the woman said. One word. No heat in it. No rank pulled out and laid on the table. She took one step back. One. And her boots came down exactly on the red painted line at the edge of the spot. Not an inch over. She stopped there and waited, hands loose at her sides, the way a person waits who has waited in far worse places than a hot ramp. 50 feet away, Chief Master Sergeant Errol Fontaine stopped scrolling his tablet. He had been half watching, the way a man watches his own people out of long habit. 29 years on flight lines had given him a sense for who belonged and who did not, and the sense was firing now, but not in the direction Kessler thought. Fontaine was not watching a lost lieutenant. He was watching the way she stood in the wash of an auxiliary power unit, the howl of it, the kerosene heat, the noise that made new people flinch, and she did not flinch. She stood in it the way you stand in weather, like it was simply the room she was in. He had seen exactly 3 people stand in jet blast like that in his life. All 3 of them had been pilots with a great many hours and at least one very bad night behind them. It was not one thing. It was the sum of a dozen small things a layman would never assemble. The way her head did not swivel toward every new noise, the way a new arrival's head always did, because she had already mapped the ramp and filed every sound under known. The way her weight sat low and balanced even standing still, ready. The posture of someone who had spent years strapped into a seat that could throw 40,000 pounds of motion at her without warning. The way she had not once looked at Kessler's rank to decide how to answer him, because rank was not how she measured a man, and never had been. Fontaine had spent half his life learning to read flight lines, and the flight line was telling him, in every signal it had, that the loudest man on it had the order of things exactly backward. Fontaine put the tablet away. Kessler was still performing. I'm serious, he said to his audience more than to her. They send these brand new butter bars out here, thinking the ramp's a museum. Walk around, touch things, get somebody killed. Not on my watch. He turned back to the woman and smiled without warmth. So, call sign. You got one, or are you still waiting on the cool kids to give you one? The woman looked at him then, fully. For the first time. It was not a glare. It was worse than a glare. It was the flat, even, unhurried attention of someone taking a reading. Her eyes went over him the same way they had gone over the jet. Intakes, surfaces, the part that moves, the part that fails. She was reading him. And whatever the gauge said, her face did not change at all. Understood, Sergeant, she said again. Same word, same calm. And she stayed on her line. Kessler laughed and clapped Marsh on the shoulder hard enough to stagger him, pleased with himself, certain he had won something. He turned and walked back toward his jet like a man returning to a throne. Fontaine was already moving across the ramp, slow, unhurried, his eyes on the woman in the unmarked suit, and a cold, climbing certainty in his chest that the loudest man on the flight line had just picked the worst possible fight, and didn't know it yet. The heat shimmered, the line waited, and the name she had not said sat painted on a canopy rail 100 feet away, waiting too. A tow crew on the next spot over saved Kessler from his own quiet for about 4 minutes. Then it broke open. It started with a warning the tug driver did not believe. Brake temp on the number 2 main, climbing past where it should sit, and the panel inside the cockpit lit a caution. The young crew chief running the tow waved off as a bad sensor. They wanted the jet moved. There was a schedule. There was always a schedule. 2 of them argued over the tow bar in the heat, while a third leaned in the cockpit and thumbed the readout like thumbing it harder would make it lie. It's a sensor, the tow chief said. Hook it up. We're moving it. Number 2 breaks past 200 degrees, the woman said from the line. Chalk it. Let it cool 7 minutes. Don't tow it hot. She had not raised her voice. She had not moved off her painted line. She said it the way a person reads a clock. No drama, only the time. The phrasing was exact. The number was exact. She had named the fault and the fix in one breath, in the clean, clipped language of someone who had said the same words 1,000 times in a cockpit, with her own life on the other end of them. The tow chief looked at her like she had spoken out of turn, which, in his world, she had. There is a particular language spoken inside a cockpit, and it is not the language spoken in a line shack. It is stripped down to the bone. Numbers, states, actions, in that order, with every soft word burned off because soft words cost time and time costs lives. The woman had spoken it without thinking, the way a person slips into a first language when they are tired. Number 2, brake, past 200 degrees. Chalk it. Cool it 7. Don't tow it hot. And a man who knew the language would have heard a pilot in every clipped syllable. The tow chief did not know the language. He heard only a stranger telling him his business. Kessler laughed. Don't listen to the tourist. 30 seconds later, the panel caught up to her. The caution went hard. The brake assembly ticked audibly as it cooled, metal complaining in the heat, and the tow chief stepped back off the bar with the careful look of a man who had just been one bad decision away from dragging a hot wheel across 100 feet of concrete. He chalked it. He did not look at the woman again, because he could not. Senior Airman Marsh looked at her, though. He stared. Fontaine reached the edge of the spot. He had heard all of it. He did not write anything down. But his jaw had set, and behind his eyes, a quiet arithmetic was running and coming up with an answer he did not like and could not yet say. She checked her watch. The face of it was turned inward, against the pulse, the way people wear a watch when they do not want the dial catching light at the wrong moment. She did it without looking like she was doing it. Then her eyes went up to the pattern overhead, ticked left to right across the sky, and came back down. She had counted the aircraft up there without appearing to count anything. 3 in the pattern. She knew it the way she knew the break. Kessler reframed the whole thing on the walk back to his crew. Lucky guess, he told them. Loud, expansive, a man narrating his own victory. You watch. These types read it off a card in tech school and think they're Chuck Yeager. She doesn't know a brake stack from a bar stool. Lost lieutenant. I've seen 100 of them. They wash out. They go fly a desk, and my jets keep flying because I don't let tourists touch them. He talked in paragraphs. He always talked in paragraphs. It was the tell of a man who had never once in his life been the quietest person in a dangerous room. The woman said nothing. The not saying was its own kind of loud. Fontaine stepped close to Kessler and dropped his voice under the APU howl. Wade, walk it back. Kessler grinned at him. Walk what back, Chief? I'm running my line. Walk it back. Fontaine held his eyes. I'm not asking as your boss. I'm asking as somebody who's been doing this longer than you've been alive, and I'm telling you that you can't read what you're looking at. It's a lost lieutenant in a hand-me-down flight suit. Kessler was already turning away, already done with the conversation. The way men are done when they have decided the world is exactly the size of their own opinion of it. Relax, Chief. I got this. Fontaine watched him go, and the audience, if it had been standing on that ramp, would have seen what Kessler could not. That the senior man on the flight line already knew something the loudest man on the flight line did not, and that the gap between those two facts was where this whole afternoon was going to come apart. By 1500 hours, Kessler had stopped running a flight line and started running a hunt. He keyed the maintenance net from inside the line shack, the radio loop that tied every crew chief and tow team and expediter on the ramp into one open ear. He keyed it on purpose. Flight line, be advised, he said, and you could hear the smile in it. We got a wanderer loose on the ramp. New girl, no patches, thinks she's a pilot. Somebody put a leash on her before she walks into an intake. Laughter crackled back across the loop. 3, 4 voices. A nickname was born in under a minute, the Lost Lieutenant, and it went around the net the way a coin goes around a circle of hands, each man passing it on a little dirtier than he got it. It was not loud. That was the thing about it. It was the small machinery of a place turning against one person. And small machinery is quiet right up until it takes a finger. Then he slowed her down. He had her in processing paperwork, every new arrival's badge sign-in routed through his line shack, and he simply did not sign it. He sent her to the pass office. The pass office sent her back to the squadron. The squadron, which had its own reasons that morning to be short-staffed and unhelpful, sent her back to the line shack, where Kessler told her, straight-faced, that he could not find her in the system, and she would have to start over. She started over. She walked the buildings in the heat, the same triangle, twice, 3 times. She did not complain. She did not raise her voice at a single counter. She stood in each line and waited her turn, and absorbed the noise and the heat and the small humiliations the way she had absorbed the jet blast, like weather, like a room she was simply in. Her stillness never cracked. If anything, the worse it got, the quieter and more exact she became, and only Fontaine, watching from a distance, understood that the stillness wasn't weakness. It was the stillness of someone conserving everything for a moment that had not arrived yet. What Kessler did not see was the phone. Each time he sent her in a circle, she photographed something. The sign-in log with the gap where her entry should be, the placard he had moved, the screen at the line shack with her name nowhere in it. Times. She caught the times. She built a record the way she built a pre-flight, methodically, in order, leaving nothing out. And she did it without one word of protest, because the record did not need her voice. It only needed to be true. Senior Airman Marsh found her at the gate bench on her third trip through and tried to help. He had pulled her arrival roster up himself, on his own tablet, off the books. "Ma'am, you're right here. You're already in the system. This is—" He looked up, confused. "Sergeant Kessler said you weren't." "I know," she said. "This isn't right," Marsh said, lower. Kessler was on them before the boy finished. "Marsh!" One word. Flat. A leash yanked. "Did I tell you to play travel agent? Get back to your jet." And in front of everyone, the gate guard, 2 passing airmen, the woman. He took the boy apart with the easy cruelty of a man who had learned that humiliation rolls downhill and never once rolls back up. Marsh went red to the ears. He went back to his jet. He did not look at the woman because he was ashamed. And the shame was Kessler's whole point. The woman watched the boy walk away. Something moved behind her eyes and was put away. Here is the truth this channel keeps coming back to, and it is worth saying plainly before the line shack door swings shut on her composed and patient face. The dangerous ones are almost never the loud ones. The dangerous ones are the ones who stand in the heat and take it and write down the times. If you have ever watched a good person get pushed by a small man with a little power and felt something turn over in your chest, that turn is the whole reason this story exists. Subscribe to Honor Tales and stay where you are, because the part you are waiting for is closer than Kessler knows. The door swung shut. She stood in the heat. And somewhere a report was already being typed that would try to make her the criminal. Kessler typed it himself, 2 fingers, leaning over a terminal in the back of the line shack, with a buddy hanging on the doorframe. He filed a flight line security violation against her, restricted area breach, unauthorized contact with an aircraft. He wrote that she had crossed a red line onto an active spot and put hands on a jet without clearance, none of which had happened, all of which sounded true enough on a form. He backdated the time by 20 minutes. He rounded every soft fact up to its hardest version. And he narrated it as he went, because a man like Kessler cannot do a quiet thing quietly. "This is how you win on the line," he told his buddy. "You don't wait for her to complain about you. You complain about her first. By the time she finds somebody to cry to, she's already the security risk. Paper beats people every time. You learn that. You never lose a fight on this ramp again." The report routed up, and the system, which does not know the difference between a true word and a confident one, believed it. A junior controller 2 buildings away saw the violation hit the queue, saw the words "restricted area breach" next to the woman's name, and did exactly what the procedure told him to do. He flagged her for a stop and identify at the gate. He froze her in processing pending review. So when she walked back to the gate to try one more time to get the badge that Kessler had been sitting on all afternoon, 2 security forces airmen were waiting for her with the careful, braced politeness of people who have been told they might be dealing with a problem. "Ma'am, we need you to step over here. We've got a flag on your name." She stepped over. Calm, hands open and flat where they could be seen, without being asked, the way a person stands who has been on the muzzle end of nervous young troops before and has no intention of making it worse for anyone. She answered their questions in clipped procedure. Name, reporting unit, purpose on the installation. She gave them a name and a squadron. She did not give them a rank, and they did not think to ask for one. And so the one fact that would have ended the whole thing in a sentence stayed in its holster, because she chose to keep it there. "I'm reporting to the squadron," she said. "I'll wait." And she waited. On the bench, in the heat. While the report sat in the system with her name on it, and the word breach beside it, growing more true the longer it went unchallenged. She had been in rooms where the wrong word on a piece of paper could end a life, and she knew exactly how little a true thing weighs against a confident one when no one with authority is paying attention. A lie does not have to be good. It only has to be first, and unopposed, and dull enough that the people processing it never look up. Kessler understood that in his bones. It was the one genuinely clever thing about him. He had built a small career out of the discovery that the system would believe almost anything as long as it arrived on the correct form, before the truth did, signed by a man who sounded sure. She could have broken it open in a sentence. She did not. She let it stand, because a thing that stands on a lie stands only until someone leans on it, and she had spent 2 days quietly arranging the weight. But the report had also crossed one other screen. Chief Master Sergeant Fontaine ran the production queue for the whole wing, and the violation surfaced in it, with a number and a name and an author, and the author's name made him stop. He had seen Kessler's name on reports like this before. He pulled the history, and the history was ugly in a quiet, patterned way. 3 prior flight line violation reports, all authored by Kessler, all filed against people who had crossed him on his ramp, all of them gone now, transferred, separated, quietly relocated to somewhere off his line. Each report just credible enough to stick. None of them ever quite disproven, because the targets had given up and left before anyone looked hard. Fontaine sat alone with 3 nearly identical falsehoods glowing on his screen, and the 4th one fresh beneath them, and he understood the shape of it now completely. This was not a man defending a flight line. This was a man who had figured out that paper beats people and had been winning that way for years. He looked at the new report, the woman in the unmarked suit, the one who stood in jet blast like weather. If he was right about who she was, Kessler had just typed his confession and filed it himself. Fontaine found her at the gate bench an hour later with 2 paper cups of water. He sat down beside her without asking, set 1 cup near her hand, and looked out at the ramp instead of at her, the way men of his generation say hard things, sideways, to the middle distance, never straight on. "Drink that," he said. "It's 101 out here, and you've been standing in it since lunch." She picked up the cup. "Thank you, Chief." He let a few seconds go by. A jet ran up somewhere down the line, the noise rising and falling. When it dropped, he said quietly, "I pulled the report. I pulled the 3 before it." He turned the cup in his hands. "If you're who I think you are, ma'am, you could end that man's career with 1 phone call. 1. You've had his number since the second he opened his mouth, and you haven't dialed it. I want to know why." For a long moment she said nothing. Then, "Because the line should hold itself accountable. Not me." Fontaine looked at her then, really looked, and he saw all of it at once, the way you see a picture resolve out of static, the inward-turned watch, the count of the pattern she had run without moving her head, the break she had called before the panel, the clipped exact way she gave 4 words, where 4 words were enough and never a 5th. The calm's brevity of a person who had learned that on a bad night, the extra words are the ones that get people killed. He saw a pilot. He saw a great deal of dark flying behind her stillness, and before he knew his own body was doing it, his spine had straightened, and his shoulders had squared, and he had come halfway to the position of attention sitting down on a gate bench. He caught himself, cleared his throat, sat back. But she had seen it, and something almost like warmth passed behind her eyes and was gone. "You're not going to tell me," he said. "No, Chief." He nodded slowly, and he understood. He had served under a very few, officers who held their rank the way she held hers, as a thing to be spent carefully, and only when it would actually buy something, never flash to win a small argument or settle a small score. Those were the ones the troops would follow into anything, not because they demanded it, because they had so plainly earned the right not to have to demand it. He had spent 29 years sorting the ones who wore the rank from the ones the rank wore, and he knew, sitting on that bench, which kind he was sitting next to. Then I'll tell him. Fontaine stood. He crossed the ramp to where Kessler was holding court by his jet, and he put his back to the others and dropped his voice to the low, flat register that 29 years had earned him. Wade, pull the report. Walk away. Today. I'm telling you this as a friend, and I'm only telling you once. Kessler grinned. Pull what report, Chief? She breached the line. She did not breach anything, and you know it because you wrote it. She's nobody. Kessler said it like a fact of nature, like weather, like the heat. Relax. She's a lost lieutenant in a borrowed suit. You're getting worked up over a tourist. Fontaine held his eyes one more second. Then he gave it up, because there is a kind of certainty you cannot argue a man out of. He has to walk into the wall himself. All right, he said. All right, Wade. And he turned and walked away, and to himself, under his breath, he said the only thing left to say. I warned him. So here is what is sitting 100 feet from where that man is laughing. There is a jet, staged and polished for tomorrow, with a name and a call sign painted on the canopy rail in crisp white letters. That name is going to end this man's afternoon, and it is going to do it in front of everyone he has ever performed for. You are going to want to be standing there when he reads it. Subscribe to Honor Tales so it lands in your feed, because we are almost there. The flight line went dark and quiet that night, and in the squadron building, a single woman stood in front of a wall of names. The Heritage Room was a narrow hall off the main corridor, lit low after hours, and its walls were covered floor to ceiling with the names of everyone who had ever flown that squadron's jets. Some names were old enough to belong to wars in black and white. Some were new, and on the wall, in the part reserved for the ones who had earned the squadron's own decorations, was a call sign in white block letters, and beneath it, smaller, a real name. Nightshade. Lieutenant Colonel Renata Sandoval. That was who she was. She was 41 years old. She had pinned on Lieutenant Colonel 2 years before. She had been sent here to take command of this squadron, to stand in front of these same airmen tomorrow morning at a change of command and accept the unit as its commander. And she had come a day early in an old flight suit with the patches pulled off, to walk the line the way she always walked a new line. Quiet, unannounced, reading the room before the room could perform for her. She had wanted to see who her people were when they thought no one who mattered was watching. Now she knew. She stood in front of the wall and let the dark hours bring the night back, the way it always came back when she was tired and alone, uninvited and complete. 2017. She was 33 then, a major, flying nights over a country on the far side of the world. The mission had been routine until it was not, the way they always were. A ground team pinned in a riverbed, with the walls closing in on them, and the radios full of voices that were trying very hard not to sound like men who thought they were going to die. And her wingman, Captain Silas Reyes, call sign Rook, 28 years old, 2 weeks from going home, taking damage on a low pass, a hydraulic line opening up, fuel bleeding out of him into the dark. Bingo Fuel had called. Bingo Fuel meant turn for home while you still could. She had heard the tone and the computer's flat voice and the number that said go, and she had looked at the fuel that was left and done the math that said she could make it back if she left right now. She did not go home. She flew the dark for 19 more minutes because a voice on the radio was still alive. She put herself between Rook and the ground and walked him through it, call by call, the way you talk a man down a cliff in the dark. Calm, exact, No extra words, because the extra words were the ones that got people killed. She brought the ground team's tormentors off them with everything she had left on the jet. And on the last pass, lo, something came up out of the dark and struck the canopy beside her head, and the world went to spider-cracked glass and a spray of fragments, and a piece of it went into her shoulder, hot, and she flew the rest of it home on fumes, with one arm going numb and blood freezing in the cold, high air. The ground team lived. All of them. 11 men walked out of that riverbed who would have died in it, and most of them never knew the name of the voice in the dark that had bought them the minutes, and that was fine. That was the job. The job did not come with thank you notes. The job came with a number you carried. 11 home, 1 not. And you carried it for the rest of your life, and you did not put it down. Rook did not come home. The dark took him somewhere over that riverbed, and the radio that had been full of his voice went quiet and stayed quiet, and there had not been one thing more she could do. They had given her the Distinguished Flying Cross with valor for that night, a Purple Heart for the shoulder. They had read a citation aloud in a hangar, the theater, the year, the act, the medal, and people had stood, and she had stood, and the whole time she had been thinking about a 28-year-old 2 weeks from home. The medal was the thing the institution remembered. The loss was the thing she carried. The two were not the same size, and they never would be, and she had stopped expecting them to. She lifted one gloved hand and laid it flat on the wall, beneath Rook's name, where someone long ago had added his call sign to the squadron's own. Tomorrow she would put on the uniform with the ribbons on it and stand in front of these airmen as their commander. Tomorrow, the name on the wall, and the name on the jet, and the name on the falsified report would all turn out to be the same name. But tonight it was just her, and the wall, and the quiet, and the audience that could see what no one on that flight line could, that the lost lieutenant in the borrowed suit was the most decorated person who had set foot on that ramp in 20 years, and that she had been letting a small man dig all afternoon, with great patience, a hole exactly his own size. Morning came hot and bright, and the flight line dressed itself for a ceremony. They had staged the jets in a clean row and rolled out a rope line and set up chairs on the apron for the change of command, and the squadron formed up in the early sun in their blues while a small crowd gathered. The woman in the unmarked flight suit walked toward the formation from the squadron building, unhurried, the same as the day before, and Wade Kessler saw her coming and felt the whole thing he had built begin to wobble, and did the thing that frightened men do. He doubled down. He stepped off the line and put himself in her path at the rope, square in front of her, and the performance was gone now, and only the threat was left. "I don't care what today is," he said, low and fast. "I don't care about your ceremony. You are not crossing my line." "Sergeant," she said, "stand aside. Make me." And he put his hand flat against her chest and shoved her back a full step. The ramp reacted before the echo of it died. This was not a frozen room. A master sergeant near the formation barked Kessler's name and started toward them. Senior Airman Marsh broke ranks 2 steps before someone caught his sleeve. Voices went up, sharp, all over the apron. People who had spent the afternoon laughing at a nickname now turning, fast, because a man in working blues had just put hands on someone at a formation in front of 100 witnesses, and even the ones who had laughed knew that line when they saw it crossed. Kessler heard none of it. He had committed. "Throw her bag off the apron," he snapped at the nearest airman, gesturing at the flight bag over her shoulder. "She's not authorized out here. Get her gear off my—" No one moved to do it. But he reached and took the bag himself and threw it, and it skidded across the concrete and spilled, and the woman watched it go with her hands open and loose at her sides and didn't reach for it, and didn't raise her voice, and didn't pull a single thing out to defend herself. She let it happen. She let all of it happen. And she looked at the crowd once. One flat, even sweep. The same read she had given the jet. And the look gathered every face and fixed the moment and place like a photograph, and the audience understood that she was not enduring this. She was collecting it. Then she smiled at him. It was a small smile. Even. Almost gentle. The first expression her face had made in 2 days that was not pure stillness, and it landed on Kessler like a drop in air pressure, a wrongness he felt before he understood. Across the apron, Chief Master Sergeant Fontaine saw the smile and went pale to the lips, because he was the one person there who knew exactly what it meant. "Okay," the woman said. One word. Soft. And it was not surrender. It was a door closing. That was the moment the sound arrived. A low, tearing roar building out of the east, climbing over the field. The unmistakable thunder of fighters running the recovery, coming home. The whole formation turned its head toward it as one. Kessler still had his hand half raised against her, frozen there, as the lead ship rolled out onto the upwind, and the tower's voice cracked across the loudspeaker net that fed the entire ramp. And the name it spoke was the one painted on the jet behind him. "Nightshade, the squadron's yours. Welcome home, ma'am." The loudspeaker net carried it to every corner of the apron, and then the lead ship's pilot, taxiing in, keyed his own radio onto the net so the whole flight line could hear, and said it again. "Tower, flight's recovered. Nightshade, that's our new boss on the ramp. Render honors." The call sign went across the concrete like a current. Heads turned. The word moved through the formation faster than any order could. Kessler's hand was still up. A staff car rolled to the edge of the apron, and Colonel Pierce Donovan, the wing commander, stepped out of it in his blues, with the eagles bright on his shoulders. He took in the scene in one pass, the spilled bag, the crew chief with his hand raised, the woman standing calm on the red line, and his face hardened to stone. Then he walked straight to the woman in the unmarked suit, stopped the regulation distance from her, came to attention, and brought his hand up in a salute so crisp it cut the air. "Lieutenant Colonel Sandoval," Donovan said, clear, carrying. "Nightshade, the wing's been waiting for you, ma'am." And the formation followed him down like a wave. 100 hands came up. Fontaine's came up and stayed up, locked, holding it longer than the rest. The rope line, the chairs, the apron, the whole machine of the ceremony resolved in 1 second into its true shape. Every one of them at attention to the woman a crew chief had called a lost lieutenant. Kessler's eyes went to the jet behind him. The staged jet. The polished one. The one he had guarded all week and shooed her away from and forbidden her to breathe on. And there on the canopy rail, in crisp white block letters, 1.5 inches tall, was the name. L.T. Cole R. Sandoval. And beneath it, the call sign. Nightshade. His face did the whole journey in about 4 seconds. Confusion first, a frown, a search for the joke, then disbelief, his head shaking a small, involuntary no. Then recognition, the cold drop of it, as every piece of the last 2 days rearranged itself into the only shape it had ever been. Then horror, plain and total, as he understood that he had asked a colonel for her call sign as a joke, had shoved her at her own change of command, had thrown the bag of the most decorated aviator on the installation across the concrete in front of the wing commander and 100 witnesses. The headset slipped out of his fingers. He did not drop it on purpose. His hand simply stopped being a hand that could hold things. It fell and cracked against the concrete at his feet, and in the held silence of 100 people at attention, everyone heard it. He had asked her for her call sign as a joke. The joke had a name, and it was painted on the jet behind him, and it had just landed. For 2 days, he had built his whole self out of one idea: that the flight line was his, that the people on it were his to rank and to mock and to move, that a quiet woman in a borrowed suit was the easiest target he had ever been handed. Every piece of that idea came apart at once, in front of everyone, in the cruelest possible order. The lost lieutenant was a lieutenant colonel. The tourist was a combat aviator with a distinguished flying cross. The nobody he had shoved was his new commander, the one whose name was on the jet he had guarded, the one whose call sign the tower had just spoken, like a benediction. There was no version of the last 2 days that survived. He stood in the wreckage of his own certainty, and there was nothing left to perform for, because every face that had laughed with him yesterday was at attention today, and not one of them was looking at him. Security forces were already moving. Fontaine had walked the 3 old reports and the new one straight to them at first light, and they had come to the ceremony knowing exactly what they were looking at. The shove at the formation, witnessed by 100 people and the wing commander himself, gave them everything the paperwork had not. 2 of them closed on Kessler from the side, quiet and professional, and one said the words, and Kessler did not resist because there was nothing left in him to resist with. He went down to one knee first, on his own, to pick up the broken halves of his headset, fumbling them in fingers that would not work. And he stayed down there a moment longer than he needed to, on the concrete of the flight line he had called his own, while above him and all around him, every airman on the ramp stood straight and tall and held a salute for the woman he had spent 2 days trying to erase. The fallout came fast, the way it always does once the first card goes. By that afternoon, the maintenance group had opened a formal inquiry, and Fontaine handed it everything: the 3 old falsified reports, the targets who had quietly left, the tampered sign-in log, the timestamps the woman herself had photographed building by building, and 100 witnesses to a shove at a change of command. It was not one bad day. It was a pattern, years deep, and once people knew to look, it was everywhere. Kessler was removed from the flight line before sundown. His certifications were suspended. The false official statements and the assault were referred up the chain, and this time there was no target left to give up and walk away and let the report stand. This time the report was about him. It was not vengeance. No one on that ramp had to invent a single thing to bring him down. He had typed it all himself, with 2 fingers, narrating as he went, and the only thing that had changed was that someone was finally reading it back. The other 3 names surfaced too, the people he had pushed off his line over the years, the ones who had given up and transferred and let his version stand, because fighting it had cost more than leaving. 2 of them were still in the service somewhere, and the inquiry reached out to them, and for the first time the record was going to say what had actually happened instead of what Kessler had typed. That was the part that mattered most to Sandoval, and the part she made sure of personally. Not the cuffs. The correction. A lie left standing keeps hurting people long after the man who told it is gone, and she had spent a career learning that the only real repair is to go back and make the record true. Sandoval took command of the squadron at 1000 hours, in her blues, the ribbons she never mentioned bright on her chest, the distinguished flying cross among them. She accepted the unit, and she said few words, because she always said few words. And the airman who 2 days earlier had passed a nickname around a radio net now stood at attention and understood, completely, who had been standing among them in a borrowed suit. She did not gloat. There was no speech about the man who had been led away. She did not name him at all. The airmen in front of her had expected, some of them, a reckoning aimed outward, a commander who had been wronged, settling the account in public. They got the opposite. She spoke for 90 seconds about the squadron, about the people who had built its name, about the standard the wall in the heritage room asked them all to meet, and she let the absence of Kessler's name be the loudest thing she said. The ones who had laughed at the nickname heard it. They would remember the silence longer than they would have remembered any words. She had one piece of business before the day was done. She found Senior Airman Eli Marsh at the edge of the apron, the boy who had pulled her roster on his own tablet, who had tried to help and been taken apart for it, who had called the fault straight when the man above him wanted them buried. She stopped in front of him, and he came to attention so fast he nearly hurt himself. At ease. She looked at him the way she had looked at the jet, reading, weighing, but the read came back different this time. You pulled my record when he told you not to. You tried to help a stranger when it cost you. And every time he wanted you to call a fault soft, you called it straight. She paused. You did the job right when it cost you. That's the whole job. There isn't any more to it than that. Ma'am, Marsh managed. You're on my maintenance team, she said. The commander's jet. Report to the chief. And she let the smallest nod of Fontaine's head, from 10 feet away, finish the sentence. This is the part you stayed for. Not the arrest. The other thing. The line standing straight again, and a quiet young man who did the right thing in the dark, finally standing in the light. If that lands somewhere in your chest, if you have ever done the job right, when it cost you, and waited a long time for anyone to notice, then this channel is for you. Subscribe to Honor Tales, and let the next one find you. Dusk came down over the field and turned the concrete to slate, and Lieutenant Colonel Renata Sandoval stood alone beside her jet. The ramp had emptied. The ceremony chairs were folded and gone. The floodlights were coming up one bank at a time, throwing long, cold light across the apron. And she stood at the canopy rail with one gloved hand laid flat against the cool metal, beneath her own painted name and the call sign she had carried out of a night that had cost her Rook. She was not thinking about the crew chief. She had already, in the quiet way she did everything, set him down and walked on. She was thinking about a riverbed on the far side of the world, and a voice that had stayed alive for 19 extra minutes because she had refused to go home. Footsteps. Fontaine, crossing the ramp in the floodlight, a headset in his hand. He stopped beside her and held it out. A new one. Hers. Signed for and waiting. Ma'am, he said. Only that. She took it. Chief. They stood a moment, the two of them, in the cooling dark, and there was nothing else that needed saying between people who had each, on some night somewhere, stood in the weather and not flinched. Her phone buzzed against her hip. She read the screen once. A line of text, encrypted, short, from a desk a long way up and a long way east of this quiet ramp. Overwatch active. Nightshade. They want you back over the strait by the 1st. Coordinates to follow. She looked at the message for a moment. Then she looked up, east, toward a horizon already going dark, where a strait she knew the smell of was waiting on the far side of the world. She put the phone away. She let her hand rest 1 second longer on the canopy rail, on her own name, on Rook's mark beside it. Then she lifted it free. The floodlights came full up across the apron, and the name, Nightshade, glowed white under them, and she turned from the jet and walked toward the squadron and the next tasking, unhurried, the way she had walked onto this line 2 days before. Quiet, complete, and carrying everything. Every soldier carries a story that few ever hear. Listen with your heart. Thank you for staying and watching. Subscribe to Honor Tales for more.